As a physician at the forefront of change in the organ transplant community, we are excited to welcome Dr. Shangina to speak with us about organ donation. And without further ado, I will give her the floor to present.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you so much for having me. I'm one of the transplant hepatologists at Vanderbilt. I've been with Vanderbilt for about 5 years. Alex was asking me to tell a little bit of what made me go into transplant field. While I was doing my internal medicine residency, I realized that in a lot of medicine, there is very few happy endings. There's a lot of happy endings in obstetrics and gynecology. There's a lot of happy endings in pediatrics, but in medicine, happy endings are actually rare. And the transplant field really allows you to experience the happy endings in patients who come into the hospital very, very sick. And the satisfaction and really the amazing feeling of just thankfulness to the donors that everybody experiences when we can see our people after transplant is incredible. And so that's what got me interested in the transplant. I don't know about the high-level overview that I'm going to be able to give. I'll talk a little bit about how the transplant works and organization of the transplant in the nation. A lot of what I'm going to talk about is more about a liver transplant because that's where my interest is. But we'll start with let me try to share my screen here with a little statistics. So according to the UNOS, which is a United States National Organ Sharing organization that really oversees the organ donation in the United States, about 17 people die each day waiting for an organ transplant. That's a pretty big number. This is probably a bigger number than what one would imagine. And every donor can save not just one person, but many, many people, by donating lungs, intestines, hearts, livers, kidneys, retinas, tendons, many, many parts of the body that could be donated. If you look at the statistics of the liver transplant, there's about 11,000 people on the wait list. This is the statistic for 2021. But there's only about 8,000 of liver transplant performed, okay? So the rest of the patients will have to wait on the wait list, and if they get lucky and they survive, they may get an organ. And a lot of people, unfortunately, do not, and they succumb to the end-stage liver disease, and they pass away. And about 12,000 of new candidates were added to the liver transplant list in 2020. And this does not only affect adults, unfortunately, pediatric liver transplant list, and not just the liver transplant, the kidney transplant, pancreas, heart, lung, intestines, is not zero. We wish it was zero, but it's not. And although mortality on the wait list for children is smaller than for adults, it is still existing. And by enhancing the organ donation, both deceased donation and living donation is our best way to try to overcome the shortage of donors and try to save some of those people. So the way that organ donation currently is organized is that the United States is divided into 11 regions. So we're over here, we're in Tennessee at Vanderbilt. And once there is an organ offer, so a person is identified as a donor, that pops up, what we call a match is being run. So a match means that the list on the regional and national level, according to the need of the organ, the compatibility, the blood group, puts everybody on the wait list in a particular order of whether or not they can be connected to this organ donor. And there's multiple different iterations of it for different organs and different systems in place. And once the match is made, the recipient is called into the hospital, the organ is retrieved and transported to the hospital, and then transplant is arranged. So if you're wondering about how it happens on the donor side, so it really starts with a first response EMT team that arrives onto the scene where a death has occurred and begins life-saving efforts. The treatment continues until the patient arrives into the hospital, goes into the emergency room, and then being transferred into the intensive care unit. And it's not until then that the doctor confirms that irreversible damage has been done to the brain and the organs. And the medical team continues the life-saving measures during, well, all of those tests are made. And it is only after the irreversible loss of blood flow to the whole brain that is demonstrated, that's when the brain death is declared. And after the brain death, the donor body is being supported by artificial means, such as ventilator and sometimes different medications that can help to keep the blood pressure up. After the brain death has been declared, an evaluation by specially trained medical practitioners from the organ procurement organizations, or OPOs, go to the hospital to see whether the patient is medically suitable for organ donation. If the patient is registered as an organ donor, that facilitates a lot what happens next. But even if they are not, a decision is deferred to the family, and the family are asked to act as a surrogate on behalf from everything, because the family would be the people who know the donor the best, from everything that they knew about the donor, whether the donor ever expressed the desire to be a donor, or whether they feel like it would be within their line of wishes to donate their organs. And that's where the decision is made, whether or not to proceed with organ donation. And once authorization is received, organ donation takes place. I did want to mention a couple of words about the living donor liver transplant, specifically living donor for the liver. So in liver and kidney transplants, what we can do is we can actually take half of the liver or one kidney from a healthy donor who volunteers to donate a part of their organ and transplant it to the recipient. And the body can function with one kidney, and the body can also function with half of the liver, and the livers usually regenerate to their original size. The advantage of having a living donor is that when you have a patient who's, for example, eligible for a liver transplant, they are put on the wait list for a deceased donor liver transplant. The average wait time for a liver transplant is about 100 to 300 days, and the mortality is up to 30% per year. And if you are lucky enough to survive, you will receive a deceased donor. However, if you have a living donor, somebody who is interested in donating a part of their liver to you or the kidney, you can proceed with donor evaluation and then scheduling of the surgery at the next available OR date. As you can see, that confers a significant advantage in terms of timing and severity of how sick you are. You don't have to wait on the transplant list. You can get an organ, and arguably a better quality of organ, because we're selecting people who are very healthy to donate their organs. We don't have to stop there. There's a lot of things that has been done. So for example, pair donation. So a donor can stop forward for the recipient, however, they're not compatible for whatever reason. This usually occurs within the kidneys, although we also starting to do it in liver transplant as well. We can find another donor recipient pair that are not compatible, but see if the donor from the other pair is compatible with the recipient from the first pair. And then we can do a pair donation. What's even more fascinating is that a non-directed donor, for example, somebody and what we call an altruistic donor, a person who does not have any obvious ties to any of the recipients, just steps forward and says that they would like to donate half of their liver or their kidney, can initiate a donation chain. When they are compatible with one recipient, the donor to that recipient then donates to another recipient, the donor to that recipient donates to another recipient. And so out of one person who stepped ahead, you can facilitate the transplant for up to 4 to 5 people, which is, I think is pretty incredible. So I have a video that I wanted to show you guys, if that's okay. I'll just pause screen sharing for a second and pull it up here. Sorry for the apocalyptic noises in my backyard. I'm not sure what's going on with my dog. Just one second. Okay, here we go. I've practiced this 15 minutes ago. It worked. Here we go. So we're gonna play this commercial, which I personally really like. This is a commercial that was made by Donate Life. It's a little bit crass to begin with, but just bear with it. It has a very good ending.
This is a story about Coleman Sweeney. Coleman, in short, was an asshole. Everyone in his small town knew it. It wasn't that he tried particularly hard to be unpleasant. It just seemed to come naturally to him. Coleman felt like the whole world owed him something, which caused him to regularly ignore the rules of a decent, acceptable society.
Wow.
And he hated anything that got in his way.
Go, you got it! You got it, go! Go, go, you can do it!
And small animals. Even to children, he was an asshole. He was, as they say, born to it. But then, the strangest thing happened.
$3.
Something entirely unexpected. Coleman Sweeney died. A brain aneurysm. Well, subarachnoid hemorrhage to be more specific. And it came as he argued over whether extra fries should be included in a $1.99 early bird breakfast, which was a typical Coleman Sweeney play. It was then that Sarah found something completely unexpected. Coleman Sweeney had registered to be an organ donor. Nobody knew what caused Coleman to do it, but there it was, generous and majestic. And that was the day that Coleman went from asshole to hero. You see, his liver went to Stan, a father of two. His heart went to Miranda Morgan,
Who here has been to this?
who went on to teach for 25 more years. And his tendons went to Staff Sergeant Donahue, who was able to walk again and would never need to be pushed across the street by his physical therapist. And in a moment of small world irony, his corneas went to his 82-year-old next-door neighbor so that she could finally see the crap that her dog made in the side yard and pick it up. Yes, in life, Coleman was a bona fide asshole. 365 days a year, 24/7.
Hey, bye-bye!
But in death, well, let's just raise our middle fingers and shout, "Up yours, Coleman Sweeney. You're not an asshole anymore."
I don't know. I personally am a big fan of this commercial. I know it's a little bit on the edge there. So if anybody is interested in how to become an organ donor, it's very, very easy. You can do it when you're renewing your driver's license, when you're getting your driver's license. You can always go online. You can just Google how to become registerme.org and register. And even if you don't want to do that, it's something that you can express to your family and to your friends, that in case a situation ever arises that you would be interested in becoming a donor, because that could relieve a lot of anxiety and pressure that sometimes the family can feel in those terrible, terrible moments, and really provide a life-saving opportunity for many people. So I'll end here, Alex.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I also read the ad. I think it was very touching. It's truly important to see how many lives organ donation touches, which is why I think this panel will be perfect to hear how organ donation has each of your lives. So I have a couple questions. Go ahead and start asking them, and then I'll say the order of the panelists responding right after. So first question is, I would love to hear your story. So what's your story? How did you get into the organ transplantation, organ donation sphere? And if we can start off with Avi, and then Alina and Dr. Shinjina.
Cool, I'm happy to start, and thank you so much to everyone for coming, and to ODAC for organizing this event. I love all the work that ODAC does, so it's a real honor to join. So just to start by introducing myself a bit and my relationship to organ donation. So my name is Avi, and when I was 17, I read an article in Vox, I don't know if some of you are aware, a news publication, about Dylan Matthews, a journalist there who had donated his kidney to a stranger altruistically, as Dr. Shinjina described. And immediately I was struck because I didn't even know that you could donate a kidney to a stranger. And I also didn't know a lot of details about kidney disease and organ donation. So I didn't know how bad it was to be on dialysis, just how draining it was. I learned that the death rate from certain types of kidney disease is similar to that of brain cancer. And that with a transplantation and a new organ, one can live so much longer. And in particular, that a living organ is a lot better than a deceased organ. Deceased donations are incredibly important, but as Dr. Shingina described, living organs both tend to be of a higher quality, and you can sort of time it well. Such that in an ideal case, someone doesn't even need to go on dialysis because they can get healthy kidney. And so I was really, really moved by all of this. I, at the time, was reading lots of philosophy and moral philosophy, and I really wanted to live by the principle of, if I could take a relatively small risk onto myself and have the benefit to someone else be much greater, then that's something I want to do. And I learned that the risks of living kidney donation are similar to that of childbirth and similar to that of appendicitis. And those felt like sort of risks that are on par with things that I might otherwise do in another world. And so, and then the benefits to the recipient are just so large. So I contacted all the hospitals in New York that did kidney donation, and only one of them got back to me saying that they do altruistic kidney donations for people who are under the age of 21. That was NYU Langone Hospital. I got in touch with them, and they gave me a CAT scan and did a whole bunch of medical tests. I was eligible to donate. They wanted me to wait 1 year to go to college, since I was still in high school at the time, to make sure I was fully informed, fully consenting, had gone through this sort of transition in my life before donating. And so I had reached out to them when I was 18, and then when I came back the summer between my freshman and sophomore year of college, I had the surgery and donated my kidney to a fellow New Yorker. And yeah, it went really well, and I'm excited to talk more about it throughout the course of this event.
That's great, AB. My story, so I'm Aline Gregosian. I'm currently a physician. My specialty is emergency medicine and critical care. My story goes back about 4 years. So I was at the end of my residency training when all this happened to me. I had never had any medical issues before. I think I'd probably been to a doctor maybe a couple times in my life, especially like in my adult life. And I had finished med school in 2016, and I was about to be finishing my emergency medicine residency in 2019 when I suddenly got really, really sick. So I thought I had like a cough and shortness of breath. It kind of got worse over the next few weeks. I eventually ended up back at the hospital as a patient, not as a doctor. And my heart stopped. So they did a bunch of tests, while all this was going on. They had to resuscitate me, and they told me eventually that I had really bad heart failure. We found out, after lots of tests for the next few years, I actually had a genetic condition called familial dilated cardiomyopathy, and a DSP or desmoplakin gene mutation, which had led to this. So I got transferred to Penn. This was 2019. That's where I got my heart transplant and did my initial care. I went back and I finished my residency, and then I went back and I actually did a fellowship in critical care, which was already something that I had been planning. And I just did it like a year later, basically. I deferred it. So I just finished that fellowship in August. I did most of my training in cardiac and transplant ICU. So I actually took care of a lot of cardiac patients with advanced heart failure, but also a lot of liver and kidney transplant patients too. So it was very interesting kind of being on both sides. And yeah, I finished fellowship in August, and now I kind of do some per diem ICU work, and I live in LA, which is my hometown. So it's been an interesting journey, both as a patient and then a doctor too.
I think I already mentioned what drew me to transplant, to select this as a profession. It's very, very rewarding work, and it's incredible to see the connections that donors and families have, and it's just a beautiful feel to just witness the goodness in the world.
Absolutely agree. And just so we'll have questions all the way probably towards the end. So if we could hold all questions until then, that would be great. But thank you all for your answers. And my next question was more about support systems. What was your support system? What did that look like? And then maybe Dr. Schill, what have you seen for your patients, their support systems, and how important is that to them? And I think we'll keep the same order. So AB, Aline, and then Dr. Schill.
Thanks. Yeah, I was very grateful to have a really wonderful support system during and after my donation. So, well, I will say when I first told my mom that I wanted to donate my kidney, she was not very happy at all. She also had not heard that this was a thing one could do, and she was very opposed. But the more I well, really, the more we learned about the process together and the risks together, she became sort of more and more supportive, and then was a huge support for me during the donation itself. I think I want to emphasize just how I think smooth the recovery was. So I was in the hospital for 2 days after the surgery. The surgery itself was around 5 hours, and it might sound a bit odd, but I actually enjoyed being in the hospital because my friends visited me. I had one friend who brought me his Xbox and put it in my surgery room, and so I got to play for 2 days, and it just that was good. I won't say there was no pain. There certainly was some pain, but I was hooked up on pain relievers in such a way that it never got to be too bad. And then after 2 days at the hospital, the same friend who brought the Xbox, I went over to his house because I live in a 5-floor walk up on the Upper West Side, and I wasn't quite ready to walk up the stairs. And he lived in an elevated building, and so I stayed with him for a few days, and he sort of took care of me. And I really think that if not for that, it would have been a much more grueling recovery process. Then after a week or so, I was able to walk up my stairs and sort of go on walks in general. And so I had a relatively normal summer, though no strenuous exercise and no lifting heavy weights. And then since then, it's been sort of, I never think about it because it's just had no negative physical effect on me whatsoever. But no, I felt really, really grateful. I think it was sort of a privilege to have the support system that I had. And I think it was really essential for the decision to donate a kidney.
As far as the patient side of things, so my family and my friends, a little easy for me because all of my friends were residents, and so it was easy for them to hang out in the hospital room because they were also at work. And so I had a lot of visitors, a really good support system. After transplant, you actually need to have, if you're a recipient, you need to have a really good support system because the first 6 months, you're going to be in and out of appointments all the time. And so that's actually one thing they look for when you need to get some sort of transplant. So my support system was everything for me. My mom actually moved in with me. I was living in Philadelphia at the time. She moved out of LA and with me for the first 6 months. And that was amazing because she helped me out with my appointments and my meds and whatnot. And I tell people all the time that I think this is a lot harder on caregivers and your support system than it is on you, because they are constantly worried about everything that's going on. And as the patient, sometimes, you're sedated or you don't really understand the gravity of things in the situation because you're just trying to get through it. And so I always really, really try to put it out there that, support system and caregivers are basically the most amazing people. And I'm so thankful to have had mine.
Yeah, on the transplant side of things, we have a pretty rigorous process. So for the liver transplant recipients, we do need a primary caretaker, somebody who is who can dedicate 24/7. We usually quote 3 to 4 months, so we need that kind of dedication from them. So we need a primary caretaker and a secondary caretaker who would be willing to take this place of the primary caretaker if something was to occur. On the living donor side, the supports are even more important. I think a lot of our process in evaluating liver donors, we're trying usually to stretch out the process if we can, because we want to give the donor as much time, the longest possible time, to win all the pros and all the cons and think about and absorb all of the risks of the donation. The risks of donation are quite different for the kidney and the liver. Some kidney transplant can even be done laparoscopically. For the adults who are donating a liver, the risks are definitely higher than just an appendicitis or childbirth. The risks usually are around the same as for an open heart surgery or CABG that that you might know. I have to say that it is very rare that the support system is an issue that precludes somebody from donation, because I think it probably has to do with the type of the person who decides to be a living donor. It's very rare that they don't have a good support system. They usually are individuals who are very giving and altruistic and surrounded by wonderful people in their life.
Definitely. Thank you all for those answers. And it's really interesting to hear about the different types of support systems that you all had. My other question is, all of you have done work in organ donation advocacy. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about your work, and at what point in your journey in organ transplantation donation did you realize that this was a cause that you want to keep fighting for? Sorry, and the order for this time, can we have Aline first, and then Dr. Sheena, and then Aby?
I actually, when I think I was like 7 or 8 days out of transplant, and I decided to, like, out of nowhere, write a blog. You're actually in really high dose prednisone or steroids right after transplant. And so I'm convinced, like, because of that, I just had like a lot of energy, but also probably because I had like a really good heart. So right after my transplant surgery, I was like, oh my God, like I got to do something with all this. And so I started a blog initially just to like share my story, so that I didn't have to constantly tell people what was going on with me, and I would just like send them the link. But then I realized more and more that it was helping me connect with other transplant recipients and other professionals. And it was just like this amazing way to give back. And so many people were visiting the site. So I initially decided to like do some sort of fundraiser for Donate Life America. And then from there, I started volunteering at like whichever OPO, like at that time I was living in Philly. So Gift of Life was the one that I would kind of like go to if I wanted to do any volunteer work. And then when I moved to New York, it was Live On New York. And so I did a few different like lectures for them, and I did little promos for them, and, you know, all just out of the fact that I was now a transplant recipient and I wanted to give back. I actually got in touch with my organ donor's family. Her name was Lucy, and me and the family are very close now. And interestingly, when we met, we found out that she, like her mother, Laura, had been doing just as much work for organ donation that like I was doing on the side. And so we connected through that, and we've done a lot of stuff together too. So it's been really, really, really nice.
That's amazing. It's very, very inspiring. Please keep doing the amazing work. I have to say, I actually follow you on Twitter. So even before this this webinar, I have heard of you. Very inspiring story. So, you know, on my end, we don't do a lot of outreach. It's, you know, for various reasons, various ethical reasons, from the point of view of physician who works for a transplant center. The volunteering that I do is mostly on the level of UNOS. So I'm on the UNOS Living Donor Committee that provides a national policy and develops national policies of donation. And a couple of projects that I was very happy to be a part of is to improve the follow-up for the living liver donors. The kidney donors have pretty good follow-up, but the liver donors unfortunately do not. As well as try to, we're actually studying gender inequities in living donation right now, because in both kidney and liver, a lot of donors are disproportionately female and donating to male recipients. So we're trying to see how we can address that better by perhaps, you know, channeling the altruistic, non-directed donors when they're donating, that should be channeled towards more female population. But that's the extent of my donor advocacy.
Yeah, I can speak about my advocacy, and apologies for the technical issues there for a moment. So I think that the moment where it occurred to me that I could be involved in advocacy at all with relation to kidney donation was I had the privilege of meeting the person who received my kidney live on Good Morning America, something like 2 weeks after my donation, which was totally nuts. I was just sitting in the recovery room in NYU, and the media coordinator came in and asked if I would be interested in meeting my recipient on TV. And I was sort of shocked, and I said, yeah, totally, if I can help get the word out there more. And then a year after that, sort of by happenstance, I learned that had inspired someone else to donate. And so it felt like, and for free, I had doubled the impact of my donation. And it occurred to me that, yeah, the sort of work that ODAC is doing of spreading awareness and so on can be really impactful. Yeah, I've sort of taken to taking opportunities to speak about donation whenever I can. And then later on, I learned that there was a legislative push in New York to reimburse kidney donors for out-of-pocket costs associated with donation. So in lots of states, and previously in New York, it was the case that if you wanted to donate your kidney, insurance would cover the cost of the surgery itself, but you would have to pay for travel to and from the hospital, for lost wages, for a hotel stay if you needed to stay in a hotel for your donation. So I wrote an article for City and State, which is a publication in New York City, about the bill that was being proposed to fix this, and also had some involvement in an organization called Waitlist Zero that did advocacy to try and pass a bill to fix that. And the great news is that just this past legislative session, Governor Hochul signed in this bill to law. It had passed unanimously through the state Senate. So yeah, very excited about that. Hopefully that can get done at a national level as well, because it just shouldn't cost. I think the median is something like $1,400 per donor in out-of-pocket costs, and that basically kind of functions as a tax on donation, and it really should be free.
Thank you all for answers. And then this will be our last question for me, and then we'll move to the Q&A. So I want to know who in your journey did you meet that inspired and changed you, and how in turn that helped you share parts of your own story. So for this question, can we start Dr. Shangina, and then AB, and then end with Aline?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, in medicine, being the provider side, when something happens and the patient does not survive, I think all of us tend to take it pretty personally, and it requires a lot of time to process and rethink of what could have been done differently. And one of the experiences that I had is a couple of years ago, we had a patient who was listed at a very high priority for a liver transplant. And unfortunately, she did not survive. And it was a lovely family, and her son wanted to be a living donor, but she was just too sick, and it did not work out. And through all of that, we were talking about how I'm originally from Canada, and the family was aware of that. And then 2 years later, her husband showed up in our office, and apparently he is a flight director at NASA for the space missions. And he brought a Canadian flag that was sent to space as a thank you to our team for caring for his wife. And it was a very different experience for me, because we're always, used to, we want to hear success stories, right? We want to hear about how people did well and how they survived. And sometimes that's what we, attribute our worth as a physicians to. But it really showed me that it's what you do for people through this journey. And sometimes, even if things do not work out and people do not survive, people value how you can care for them during this tough time of being listed for a liver transplant. And it was really touching, because it was not a gratitude for a happy ending, but it was a gratitude for our team's effort in what we could and could not do for that woman. So that's a story that came to mind.
Yes, someone who's really inspired me on my journey is the person who Chris, who is the recipient of my donation, who I'd love to speak a bit about. So I think when I was donating my kidney, I kind of expected it to go to someone on the older side, just because people who suffer from kidney disease tend to be on the older side. But Chris, the person who received my kidney, was actually just 3 years older than me when I donated. So I was 19 when I donated, and he was 22. And he had to drop out of high school because he was sick with lupus, and also wasn't eligible to get a kidney for several years because he was too sick. They thought that if he received a kidney, then he wouldn't be able to live much longer even then. And just hearing more about his story and what he had to go through before receiving a kidney was incredibly inspiring and extremely moving to me. Tragically, his younger sister died while he was suffering from lupus, and his parents had hoped that her kidney could be transplanted to him, but she wasn't a match. And so it was just a sort of series of family tragedies it was just so awful to hear. They were hoping that there could at least be some sort of silver lining, but no, the sister's kidney was not able to pair. But he had sort of never gave up hope. And the whole hospital staff at NYU just loved him so much, and they were really rooting for him. And so when I decided to donate, they thought it sort of worked well because I was on the younger side as a donor. They were hoping that my kidney could sort of last him a lifetime, because I forget the exact number, but I think the average living kidney only lasts 7 to 8 years, but hopefully his lasts much longer than that. And so, just a story of real, perseverance and someone who went through a lot of adversity that's really inspiring to me.
Two people were obviously very inspiring to me. Number one was my organ donor, who I just already talked about. Lucy was her name, and she saved my life. So I basically always am very grateful for her and her family and the decision that they made to make her an organ donor. She went on to save 4 people, so 2 kidney recipients, me, and a liver transplant recipient. But aside from Lucy and her family, somebody that really, really helped me through my journey was my friend Kobe Salerno. If some of you guys already know me from before this, like, me and him have a podcast together called Both Sides of the Stethoscope. And the reason why he was important is because when I got my transplant, he messaged me on Twitter. He was like, hey, by the way, I'm an IM resident. I was an EM resident at the time. And I'm going to go into cardiology, and I've had a heart transplant for 10 years. If you have any questions. And I was like, oh my God, the people don't understand the importance of meeting people with the same issues as you, who are kind of going through similar things. Most heart transplant recipients aren't young. Most heart transplant recipients aren't doctors. And so to meet him was amazing. And now we're best friends. So, I would ask him all sorts of things, do you wear an N95 with these kinds of patients? And do you do this? And so it was really nice to have someone to talk to about all the issues that I was going through, especially through residency. And so he's really helped me out. And then now we have that podcast together, and we're really good friends. So
thank you all for your responses. And I think now's the time for our audience to ask you questions. So anyone in the audience has a question, please go ahead and raise your hand on Zoom, or you can also put your question in the chat and we'll go ahead and read them out. Someone's asking of the New York Times article about the huge inefficiencies in organ donation. Does anyone have a comment on that?
Yeah, so go ahead.
So Kendall had written that. She's one of my good friends. She's amazing. I think it was a really good article. I do think that organ donation is extremely complicated, and it's hard to put the blame on one specific organization or one thing. There's so much that goes into organ donation, and I think eventually, once we have more transparency about what UNIS does and how we do things, and people have more of an understanding of how complicated the process really is, then I think things will slowly get better. It is unfortunate that people do die on the waiting list, but I think that we're at least going in the right direction of doing what we can for now.
I agree. I think if you can imagine, if there is tens of thousands of people waiting on the list and tens of thousands of people who are dying, matching these organs is very, very complex, and it requires a lot of coordination, as my cat would agree here, sorry. So any system that takes on this process is not impervious to inefficiencies. And I think that it's great that we reassess how we do things. And it's great that things like that, where the processes are being revised and revisited and audited, are happening. And I think that whatever the review that's happening with UNOS right now, I think it is only going to make organ donation better. The numbers of 28,000 wasted organs, it's a little bit more complex than that. There's lots of things that influence organ discard rate. It depends on the area where you're in, on how aggressive the transplant programs are, which organs are accepted. Some of them are marginal organs, some of them are hepatitis C positive organs, hepatitis B positive organs. Different programs have different thresholds of which organs they would accept. So I would probably just defer to the a review of the organ donation that's currently happening with UNOS, and I think we'll have more information in the next couple of years. I completely agree with Dr. Grigosian. With respect to the second question that I see here, Dr. Shinino, what makes transplant surgery special, different from general surgery, and what advice would you give to someone interested in going down that path? I guess it depends whether you're a recipient or a donor. I'm guessing that you're asking from the position of the donor. So when in organ donation for a living donation, I think there's a couple of things that are at play. First of all, you do not receive any, other than emotional satisfaction from donation, you do not receive any direct benefit. So it can be very anxiety provoking to subject yourself to a real risk of dying. And especially if you have a family and people who are invested in your well-being, and it's hard to explain it to them sometimes. So I think that's what makes it a little bit different, preparing for that surgery, than just having a general surgery done. I would say that the advice is to talk to as many people as you can. You should always strive to talk to as many donors, to as many recipients, to the caretakers, to gather the most possible information. And sometimes it's even good to go to a couple of different transplant centers, because although transplant practices we would like them to be as standardized as possible, they can vary between the centers.
Thank you for that answer. I think we have a couple more questions. I see that someone from the Vanderbilt party had asked about what resources are available for patients who don't have social support, but they need a transplant, whether there's any services that can help provide support to have them receive a transplant. Does anyone want to take this question?
Yes, so from the programmatic standpoint, because there is a shortage of organs, we feel that we are responsible to allocating an organ to a person who will most likely derive the most benefit and the most longevity from it. And that's why there's such a stringent criteria on the recipients that are placed from different transplant centers. And if a person does not have a good social support or primary caretakers, there's numerous literature on it that the outcomes of transplant are poor. So from our perspective, it's extremely important to have somebody who is interested. In our program, we do not allow paid caretakers. Other programs may be different, but we feel that it is not quite ethical to allow paid caregivers for people who can afford it versus people who cannot. And it's also unclear how stable that relationship could be going forward. And there's not really ancillary services. We ask people to reach out to their friends, to their family. Here in Tennessee, a lot of people find support to the church groups and networks that they have, which are very good, reliable people that are stepping forward. But we cannot transplant someone who does not have a good social supports, unfortunately.
Somebody asked, how did the pandemic look different to you as someone who received an organ transplant? Yeah, so overall, it's been an interesting few years. There's a balance between trying to figure out how to mitigate risks of like doing certain things. Like, for example, if I want to go, I went to like a Suns game last week, and my thing was, should I take the risk of possibly getting COVID? But I wore a mask. So I do say no to some things, especially early on during the pandemic, that I, would have otherwise said okay to had I not been immunocompromised. And then the other thing that people usually ask along with this is, how were you an ICU doctor during COVID? And I very carefully is always my answer. Like, I did what I could. I tried not to do intubate COVID positive patients, but sometimes you have to do what you have to do. With that being said, I had really good support in my hospital system. So they knew like if I had to take an extra day off or something, or if I couldn't go into a patient's room, or if I was uncomfortable doing this because this person has COVID, then they knew and they would accommodate me, and nobody ever like forced me into doing anything. But overall, I just was a little bit extra careful. And as a healthcare provider, so I got my transplant like literally the months before COVID started. And so since then, like I've always been wearing N95s and double masking even before COVID. And so I'm just very careful at the hospital.
Thank you for that. And then I think we have one question for Avi. Have you inspired any other people to donate their organs? Would you be able to answer that?
Yeah, so I already mentioned that I learned that from meeting the recipient of my donation on Good Morning America. I learned someone else donated their kidney, but more sort of closer to home, my mom, as a result of my donating my kidney, was also inspired to donate her kidney to a stranger. It was a real 180, because I'd also mentioned, when I first wanted to donate, she was super opposed, like wanted none of it, and then eventually switched and said, if you donate and it goes well and it's all safe, then I'll do it too. So she donated her kidney 6 months after I did. She actually started a kidney chain, which Dr. Shingina mentioned in her presentation. So her kidney basically allowed 4 other people to get a kidney as well. I think her kidney was flown down to Georgia, where it was transplanted to someone there. And she's been doing more advocacy than I have. She's like, I think really, also someone to look up to in this regard. Lots of policy advocacy in New York, and has been really inspiring. So that meant a lot to me. And it was just quite exciting that she donated after I did.
I think we have time for just one more very quick answer. Aline, could you speak to organ rejection and immunosuppress as well? And then we'll end the Q&A for right now.
Sure. I'm going to speak more as a patient, although I've taken care of plenty of patients who have acute rejection. But as a patient, it's something that you're always worried about. So you're on immunosuppression, which basically suppresses your immune system so it doesn't attack the organ that you have for the rest of your life. Literally for the rest of my life, I'm going to be on that. Depending on which organ you have, your organ immunosuppression levels are different. So like heart transplant recipients tend to be at a higher level than, for example, some kidney recipients. But overall, like no matter what, there's always a chance of organ rejection. 2 types. One is acute, so it'll happen, within the first year of transplant, and the second type is chronic. So over time, every organ transplant doesn't last forever. So over time, each organ has its own kind of way of showing chronic rejection. It's something that you're always worried about as a patient, but we get blood work done pretty regularly. Anytime we have specific symptoms, we get imaging done to make sure that we don't have this. If you do have organ rejection, it's treated in multiple ways. It doesn't necessarily always mean that you need to get a new organ, but sometimes it does mean that. Sometimes they'll do things like a steroid burst for a few days. Sometimes they'll just lower your immunosuppression and recheck. Increase it and then recheck. But overall, there's different ways, and there's different medications for it too. There's different ways to address it. It's something that is always on the back of my mind. But again, I think with time, Dr. Shingina will know this better than me. The first year you're at like the highest risk, and then over time you're not as high risk for acute rejection. But yeah, that's basically how it is.
Thank you for that answer. And I think we'll end our Q&A right here. Thank you all the panelists for your time. I really appreciated hearing all your stories. It's very, very inspiring. And I know our audience feels the same. Hopefully we can have another web just like this one, since there's a couple questions we didn't get to. So look out for that. And I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to our head of social, Yasmin, who makes all the beautiful graphics that you see. If you follow our Instagram, follow our Instagram. But Yasmin, over to you.
I'm just gonna share my screen. Okay, can you all see that? Okay, great. All right, thank you, everybody. I'm just gonna do a closing speech, just thanking you all for coming on this busy Tuesday night. We all know that you had tried to work us into your schedule, and we really, really do appreciate that. This is a very exciting event in ODAC's history. It's been a long time in the making, and also, like it's been said before, this is our very first webinar, and we hope that this is one of many. So I'd like to thank our speakers first and foremost for dedicating their time and their energy and to making this whole event possible. We are really fortunate to have such a diverse panel to really speak about all of the aspects of organ donation and the organ donation process. I would also like to thank our amazing partners. I'd like to thank the Live On New York team, and especially for Scott Bull for his mentorship and helping us reach audiences, and the Donuts for Donation drive in December that we hosted. You can see that on our Instagram. Thank you to the TSO team, especially Doug Hausman, for putting us in contact with many donors through the monthly calls, and also through for amplifying our events on their platform. And another thank you to the Hearts for Russ Foundation for advising us on how to enter the nonprofit space, and especially providing us critical funding. Thank you to the Chris Klug Foundation for amplifying our work, and also for collaborating with us in spring of 2021 when we did our Youth Advocacy Month campaign. Thank you to Vanderbilt University, that's home to our second ODAC installment, and as some of you may know, it's where our founder, Chirag Ram, attends medical school. We really appreciate him connecting us with Dr. Shangina. Another thank you to the Office of Gail Brewer for amplifying this event in her weekly newsletter. I know we have a lot of people on that call from that newsletter, so thank you. Another thank you to the McGill Entrepreneurship and Chemistry Department. They shared this event in their big, vast networks and email lists. And of course, a thank you to our ODAC alumni, specifically Dia, Maria, Sophia, and Juan for all of the work that they've put into our organization to get us to the point we're at now. We are really excited about the success of the webinar. I'd like to shout out the leadership team that's been organizing this. First, a shout out to our incredible executive director, Alex. He's invested so much in this organization and has really grown so much in just a year of being executive director. Also like to shout out Dia for her wonderful work as a chief operating officer. Another thank you to Lasia, who's our amazing director of community relations, and our wonderful director of public relationships, Deepika. And in each of these teams, we have many hardworking fellows who have helped us organize interviews, who have given their opinion on graphics, who have helped with emailing and scheduling. We hope that this webinar is a first of many, and we would really love the opportunity to work with your organization or for the organ donors and recipients on this call to tell your story. All of the work that we do is for organ donors and recipients, and we have a number of projects ongoing to support them. You can find us on Facebook, on LinkedIn, where we release press releases and our blog posts. You can also find us on Instagram, where we do a lot of fun, engaging graphics, and we also do blog reposts, and then our Spotify podcast is also available both on Spotify and also on the Instagram. And of course, keep up to date with our website. That's got the most recent information. Thank you again for all of your time, for your energy. We really appreciate your support, and we hope you have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of the night.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for organizing. This was terrific.
Thank you so much for attending.